Okay, guys, I'm just waiting. I'm just setting everything up, so just turn up as you like, and you can ask any questions at the side. You're on the screen. You're being recorded. Ask me anything you like about your book, about your story, get started, etc., etc., etc. I'll be there. Click on the link in the profile above. I'll see you through YouTube. Thanks, guys. Bye. Bye, guys. In 10 minutes' time, we'll be live on YouTube doing a question and answer session. Ask me anything. Ask me anything. Bye, guys. Guys, in 10 minutes' time, we'll be live on YouTube doing a question. Anything you like about your book, about your story, get started, etc., etc., etc. I'll be there. Click on the link in the profile above, and I'll see you through to YouTube. Thanks, guys. Bye. Bye, guys. In 10 minutes' time, we'll be live on YouTube doing a question and answer session. Ask me anything you like about your book, about your story, get started. Guys, for anyone on YouTube, if you have any questions about your book, or while we're on Instagram, also the film page, if anybody wants to ask anybody about the films, their stories, and so on, far away. So I'm just setting everything up. It won't be a second. We've never actually done the YouTube live before, so let's see what happens. My name is Jed. Good evening, sir. I don't know why the connection is terrible. Well, that's BT for you. Okay, if anyone has any questions at all, let me just give you a reminder what this. So obviously tonight's call is called Ask the Author. So I've now written 21 books. I have another 3 books not finished but almost finished. Also now written and created 5 films. So I'm really pleased with that. We've got 2 more films on the go. I got 1 in script process and 1 in funding process also. So what I really wanted to do was I really wanted to fire through a couple of most commonly asked questions that I get asked about writing books. So I'm just going to read the questions I always get asked. And if anybody has a question on Instagram, feel free to ask the question. And for those who are watching this video beyond the live call, obviously, if you ask a question in the comments underneath, I definitely will answer that question for you. So let's fire away. Hang on. Okay, so the first question is tips. People say, do I have any tips for writing non-fiction books? Well, I have written a couple of non-fiction books, let's call them, say, business books or help books. Escape from Humanity was non-fiction. Deliberate Recreation was non-fiction. The Consultant and all my business books, clearly, they are non-fiction books. So how do you write a non-fiction book? I think truly you have to write about what you know. If you don't know the subject, you need to spend a lot of time researching the subject before you decide to write about the subject, because if you don't research the subject, you think, oh, well, that's something nice to write about. I can pretty much guarantee it will be a disaster. Now, some of the stuff I've written about is, for over 20 years, I was actually a hairdresser and a hair salon owner. So I wrote a series of business books based on giving advice and stories around the hairdressing industry. And also my other books like Deliberate Recreation and Escape from Humanity, these were more philosophical books that were written around life reconstruction after divorce and bankruptcy and other things also. So in other words, they were subjects that I knew, subjects that I know, and subjects that I had experienced. So if you're going to write something non-fiction, whether it be history, whether it be a legacy project, a biography, and so forth, you really need to know the subject. The best tip I can give you, even if you know the subject, is make sure you write plenty of notes in small headline forms. This will help you to put down your book successfully and easily. Well, I say easily, I mean, writing a book, of course, is never easy. It can take a long time to do it. I do actually have one book I've been writing for 7 years now, and it's a huge, huge book. I haven't finished yet, but it will be finished at some point. But in the meantime, I've written plenty of books in the meantime. So a non-fiction book, in my opinion, has to be something you know something about. If you don't know anything about it, I wouldn't write about it, to be honest. Not unless you've done a ton of research beforehand. Another question I do tend to get asked is my writing any good? Now, in the early days of myself writing, I had no idea if my writing was any good. In actual fact, I started writing in the late 70s. I started writing lyrics for my punk band. And then through the 80s, I wrote quite a lot of poetry, but I always kept it very secret. I was probably a little bit embarrassed to write in the poetry, if I'm honest. And then in the early 90s, I began to write more and more stuff, business books, business manuals, until I wrote my very first published book in 2012.
But I'll be honest with you, even up until that point, I was still asking still asking myself the question: Is my writing any good? Because if you're writing yourself and you're only with yourself, and most writers tend to be isolated creatures. I mean, here I am in one of my writing rooms, and most of the time I spend my time on my own. I write my stuff, and maybe I'll post it to a blog, maybe I post it to some kind of journal, or maybe I put it on my podcast or wherever. So I'm still asking my question: Was it any good? I suppose really the only way to start judging if your writing is any good is to start publishing that writing and see what kind of reaction you get from the writing. And these days online, if it's terrible, people will tell you it is terrible. So, next question: should I write short stories? For me personally, short stories is a great way of getting into writing. I began writing short stories when I started writing more fiction and more philosophy based stuff. I would just find myself being inspired by a moment or an event and writing about that moment or that event. For me, writing short stories is a great way without over expanding. I know some of my short stories, they generally have probably one or two characters within the story, not really that many. I'd probably, in fact, just thinking about it, I would probably say maybe five characters max in my short stories, because truly that's all it needs. Now, my bigger piece of fiction that I haven't finished yet, I don't know how many characters it has, maybe 20, 30, maybe more than that as well. So there's a lot of characters in that particular story. Let me just check this. Let me do this. I'm just doing something on the Instagram feed because it keeps going off. It's the Wi-Fi feed that isn't that good. So short stories is a great way to practice. It's a great way to do it, and it's a great way to get into writing. Just sit down and write about something that has inspired you, or write about something from your life, or write about something you've read about, and create, imagine, fictionalize that short story in your head until you have a story which is quite simply a beginning, a middle, and an end. How can I put together a book of poetry? Well, of course, the first thing you have to do is write poetry, which is a much different beast to writing fiction. Now, I have written a couple of quite big volumes of poetry, and for me personally, I'm usually in some kind of an emotional state, and when I write poetry. One of my biggest pieces of poetry is actually a book called "I Am Bastard, I Am War." And it's a full book, it's a full story, but it's all written in a poetic fashion or a poetic style. So really just write down those poems, gather them all together, and publish them in a book of poetry. Of course, if you don't have an agent and you're not published, you can still publish yourself through Amazon or through other means online these days. It's very, very easy. Inspiration. As a writer, I get very inspired by only the very, very best writers. I try and focus in on those best writers. For example, my absolute favorite writer of all time is Tolstoy, the Russian writer. Um, and some of his stories I can relate to because they are a much more human and a much more emotional style. So I can relate to the way he writes, I can relate to the way he speaks, but I feel inspired by him. I feel inspired by him as a writer. I feel inspired by the way he lived his life. I feel inspired by everything, to the point that I even flew to Russia with my wife. We went to Moscow and we visited the Tolstoy's house where he lived actually in Moscow. And for me, it was a completely emotional and inspirational event just turning up. Usually, I get my inspiration from biographies of these guys. The most amazing biography I read of Tolstoy took my writing actually to a completely different level. So, Be inspired by something that excites you, something that motivates you. And of course, always going the way you feel. If it makes you feel good, it makes you feel alive, makes you feel inspired, use that for inspiration. It can be anything. Inspiration is a very personal thing. Okay, next question. How do I section my books? Well, really, how do I section my books or how to put my books into chapters? Really, what I used to do in the early days, I don't really do too much these days. One thing I used to do in the early days was write down the chapters of each section of the book. So, in other words, if there's 15, 20, 30, or how many chapters or small stories, let's call them, in the book, I would write down a headline, a subheadline of what each next chapter is going to be about. So, let's take an example. Man wakes up in the morning, John wakes up in the morning. So, write the story about John waking up in the morning. John leaves the house. So, write the story about John leaving the house. John sees something happen outside. So, the big event was John, what happened, and so on and so forth. So, I write them all down as chapter headlines, and then I write the story based on those headlines. And that's how I section my books. I mean, there's other writers do it different ways, but that's how I personally do it. So, how do I self publish? Well, the quickest and easiest way for you to self publish is without a doubt to go to the biggest bookstore on the planet, which is Amazon Books. If you want to publish your book fast and you just want to see what happens, use Amazon. It's called KDP on Amazon. So just Google KDP on Amazon and start an account, which is free, and start publishing your books. It really is that easy. We also use something called Ingram Spark to publish our books, also, which is a slightly more professional way of doing it. But Amazon is definitely the very best way to start doing self publishing. Don't forget, self publishing, you need to have a book cover. You need to have the other bits and pieces that go inside the book, on the front of the book, on the back of the book. So you'll be able to work out on Amazon. And actually, they've updated Amazon recently. And the how-to system is very, very easy. A couple more questions. Where do I start? Well, this question was in an email. Where do I start? So I'm not really sure what it meant, but I was going to assume that it's where do I start writing my book? Well, you know what? My answer to that is really just start at the beginning. When I have a new idea, I just literally sit down and type, and I keep going. And now and again, I'll stop and I'll think about, is it going in the right direction? And to be brutally honest, you can feel if it's going in the right direction or not. So I quite simply stop typing, have a look, see how it feels, and if it feels good, I keep going. But my advice to you, if you want to start writing, is just to start writing. Don't overthink it, and definitely don't edit as you write. Just sit down and start writing. Make sure you've got a quiet spot to do that in the house or at work or wherever you're going to do it. But just sit and start writing. It's really that simple. What can I do about critics or negative comments about the books? I personally don't read anything critics say because I don't care what critics say. For me, critics generally are a waste of space and a waste of time. They don't create anything, but they love to criticize those that create the most wonderful things. So for me, a critic, or if somebody writes something awful about your book, I personally just ignore it. I've seen them now and again, but I just ignore it. But it's up to you. If you get really upset by what the critics say or reviews say, don't read them. I probably am the type of person that would get a little bit upset. So that is probably the same reason I don't read them. Next question. How much should I write every day? Look, I'm a full-time writer. I probably write around 3,000 words every day without fail. I've been writing all day today. I was writing all day yesterday. Some days I don't write anything, to be honest. but almost every single day I am writing. That's probably why. So at this moment in time, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And one of them is an old document, so it's 7. I have 7 documents open right now where I am actually writing books and writing stuff. So as a writer, you have to practice your craft. And to practice your craft, you have to write. So if you're not writing every day, you're not really a writer. So write every day. The rubbish stuff will come out, the great stuff will come out, the average stuff will come out, but you should try and write every day. But Alan, I'm not on my computer every day. That's fine. Use a notepad or write on your phone. I've written books on my phone. So there is no excuse not to write every day. And the final question I have here is, Alan, I have an unfinished novel. Well, so do I. I have a couple of unfinished books that I haven't finished and I've been doing for a while. I started a lockdown project, which, to be honest, is not a fiction book. It's a business book called The Consultant. So it's 2.5 years since I began that book, and it's just been finished. Just been finished last week, and it's just an edit, and it's just getting prepared to go to publishing now. So when you've written a novel and you have to go back to the novel, it can be exhausting. It can be really tiring because what tends to happen as a writer, your style of writing will have changed from when you began writing the book. I found this in the business book I've just finished, that my writing style has changed quite a bit since I began writing that book. So the edit is a much bigger edit than I wanted to do. And I'm having to change just words here and there, but it's almost every paragraph. And when you've got a 70,000 word book, that's a lot of editing. So what you really have to do to finish a novel is you have to make an appointment with yourself and stick to that appointment. So what I tend to do is I tend to say, okay, tomorrow morning, I have booked myself in from 9 till 11:30 to finish this book. So it's like a dental appointment, it's like a doctor appointment, and nothing is going to stop it. I am booked in to finish that book. So if you have an unfinished novel, make an appointment with yourself, or 2 appointments, or 3 appointments, or 4 appointments with yourself to get the novel finished. Because honestly, that is the only way you will get the novel done. So, guys, those are just a few questions that I get asked on a regular basis from authors like yourself. If you couldn't make it on the call, and this is new for us also, if you ask a question underneath, I will definitely answer the question. So all you have to do is a couple of things. 1, subscribe to the page. 2, go to the comment page underneath. And 3, type in your question, and I guarantee to answer that question for you. That's it, guys. This is Alan from howtowriteabookproject.com, and I hope to see you on the next call. That's the question and answer session. Ask the author. Thanks, everyone. Thanks.